This is what was on the back of that four-wheeler in that video we watched. This is a crimper. This is a small one. This is actually designed for a walk-behind tractor. This is just a chevron pattern. And like I said, it's basically just laying down and chopping down the cover crop and terminating it as you go down the line. This little rig's been really helpful for getting into thick cover cropped areas. We have another one for transitioning into the next season of cover crops. For here and for what we're doing, what I'm doing, this is really helpful. So say we have animals that are on some cover crops, say they graze those cover crops, then I'm gonna follow them with this drill and plant my next round of cover crops. When I talk about my next round of cover crops, what I'm basically talking about is warm season and cool season. What we're shooting for is getting our cool season cover crops terminated in May and our warm season cover crops planted right after that in May. And then in September as well for our terminating our warm and planting our cold. Again, I know I keep saying this, but it's just been so helpful to me. Work backwards with what you want to do as far as understanding and getting your timing right with cover crops. And just understand what you're wanting to get out of them. So again, say we had animals and then they graze a warm season cover crop, then I'm gonna come and plant a cool season cover crop, and then that following spring in May, now instead of grazing it, we'll get our tractor, our big crimper, knock that all down, and then plant into it with vegetables, with a transplanter. And then all that mass, instead of animals eating it, has been laid down to suppress weeds and feed the following crop. Just food for thought.
Did you guys ever plow here at all since you've been here? So it's all been no-till?
Not here. And we've not planted these pastures, not these. I've not run that drill through these pastures. I did over there, just because it's funny you'd say that. Right over your shoulder is a sunflower. I did over there in July because I had some extra seed in here and I just decided to burn it out. But no, we've not plowed, tilled, disced, or planted these pastures. Because I want to show you guys something else. This was some soil. It's just a pile of dirt here that, I don't know, we dug up and through here, whatever. So a lot of times you'll find that those weeds and undesirable species will come growing quicker than what you want. Like if you throw down a piece of plywood in your pasture and come back in 2 months and take it away, like the weeds generally come quicker. And this amaranth and this spiny amaranth, this stuff here, this place was covered up with it when we first got here about 7-8 years ago. We're seeing it decrease a lot. We're seeing it go away a lot. And that's another thing with this high density grazing. The basic idea is that, you know, talking about trial and error, well, if we're mimicking nature, you know, and I'm trying to do what these buffalo and wildebeest and yada yada are doing out on these vast grasslands, I don't know how many tens of thousands of years they've been doing that. I know that that's some of the richest soils we have on our planet. And I know that those animals aren't having somebody out there giving them wormer, trimming their hooves, helping pull babies out, keeping them safe from the, you know, that's what we're shooting for. That's what we're shooting for on our farm. And in that relationship that they've developed with their environment, you know, a lot of the weeds, what I'm calling the weeds, they can't really handle and withstand that amount of animal impact. You know, and we've seen that happen. We've seen them become fewer and fewer over the years. If we just let them have at it, they'd never touch this stuff, and they'd go eat exactly what they want. And guess what? What they want and what we want in our pastures and what's good for the animals gets overgrazed, and then we have fields full of weeds, full of stuff. You know. And I just used the word overgraze. Let me say something real quick, and about compaction too. Overgrazing and compaction are matters of time. They're not a matter of how many animals you have. It's really interesting too. I think we talked about this once. When we first got here, there was a donkey and a horse on this property, right? And they had a salt block down in the barn, and they had automatic water down in the barn. And in the summer, you'd see it especially. They'd spend the heat of the day over there in the woods. So guess what? Right about where these swales are, like on contour, and it's just now starting to go away, but right really close to it was a path, a hard beaten, worn out path, okay? So because those animals use that every day, because they are creatures of habit, that's what compacted that soil. It was that daily routine. That's the impact of one animal unit 365 days as opposed to 365 animal units on one day. Does that make sense? Alrighty, let's keep walking. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that we don't have weeds and undesirable stuff on our farm. I'm just saying that they have decreased. And also, to bring it all back, kind of big scale permaculture stuff, I mean, I don't want to eliminate anything. I just want everything to be in balance. The issues that I'm running into and still learning about is when that stuff comes about in stockpile. And so we'll start grazing. This is a very basic idea of our logistic grazing philosophy. We'll start grazing in spring when the grass is yay tall, you know. Sometimes that's sometimes that's third week of March, sometimes it's the first week of April. We'll just start moving our animals around and getting that animal impact, and again, that selective grazing. Plants are going to grow as much as they're going to grow, and then they're going to flower. That's a general rule of thumb. So before it starts to flower, we know that it's reached its peak bulk, and then we'll bring them back around. And then we observe it throughout the season. And that'll fluctuate anywhere from 45 to, 70 days. That'll fluctuate. Whatever we didn't get to, we let grow, and that's our winter stockpile. Then we get into that when our active grazing cycle becomes dormant in like Thanksgiving-ish, late November. And then the next year, we'll flip those two areas. When we get a lot of undesirable stuff growing in the stockpiled area, I'm still learning. I don't think it hurts at all to get in there and cut that stuff, even if you just got to take a day and just go and selectively like drop your bush hog on it or put on your weed eater or whatever it is. So that's something that we're getting into as well. I showed you guys a slide. I think it said August 9th. So here's what 42, 44 days of recovery is what this looks like.
So it sounds like you pull them off. I mean, you're only keeping them there a couple, 3-4 days. Was that what you said in a typical? Or sometimes they're only on a patch for a day or two. I mean, you're moving them pretty quick. They're not there like a week or two, right? Typically.
Right.
On a patch. So how tall would it be? I'm just wondering when you move them. You're mob grazing. You got a fair number of animals. You're keeping them in a small area. But how tall would this have been? I saw the picture, but what do you think it was?
How tall was it when we put them in here?
When they left.
When they came out.
Yeah.
What was our impact?
Yeah.
3 inches.
Okay.
2-3 inches.
Pretty well down, but it wasn't to the ground, right?
Yeah, I don't want it to get like totally bare. I don't want that. I just want, I do want that high level of impact. What I don't want are bare spots.
Right.
And when we've had grass that's really, we've had our forages get really tall and thick before and said, well, you know what, we're just going to take the top third, where all that energy is, and we're going to get them to trample the rest. And we've done that, and it broke down beautifully, all that matter, and everything recovered quickly. But we also found that we were shading out the growing tips of the existing grasses, and then that was leading to more space, bare soil, right, in between our plants. which leads to, you know, we don't want bare soil. We talked about that in there. You know, we're also not utilizing as much of what we had as well. Something I'm telling you guys, it's something I tell myself, you know, you kind of got to let it work and keep the faith. If you're able to do that and get real rigid with our program, like, you know, I'm going to stick to our program and see who cuts it and who doesn't. I also think that diverse species of animals helps to throw off and decrease parasites within your animals. I think they help.
Are you going to winter stockpile this section, or are you going to bring them back inside?
I might stockpile this and let this grow up a little bit more. And I'm happy with the majority of what we're seeing here. You know, we've got some diverse grasses in here. There's definitely some weeds, lots of clover. So, you know, we may let this come into its own and then hit it right around frost or so. Or whenever, or just throw it in with our stockpile that we already have whenever we're done with our active grazing. But this area was within that active grazing cycle that I spoke about earlier. So we'll see what happens. Hey, you want to look at some soil just for the fun of it? Just kind of off the cuff. But I want to look at it across the street, because I know it won't be as easy to dig this hole, and John and I will talk about that a little bit. But with any luck, we'll see some macroorganisms and soil aggregation in here. All right, what do we got? Let me go right where you are so I can get it in the sun. Well, I've got some good aggregation happening in here, and you can see how it's kind of decreased down there. So this is at getting into that rhizosphere where most of that activity is happening. Our first layer, yeah, see some of that biochar is getting incorporated and worked down in there. This is biochar. Smells pretty good. Looks pretty good. It's moist. It's cool.
Crumbly.
Yeah, a lot of moisture in it. This is the first thing I noticed.
Yeah. Yeah, so will you hold on to that?
Yeah.
And we'll compare that with what we got across the street.
That's kind of amazing if you look at how far the biochar has worked its way down. I mean, it's an inch and a half in the soil now. Huh?
Yeah.
With the help of the animals.
The biochar was applied before the animals went in, and then they worked it down. And you know, obviously, I mean, we did that on purpose to see what that effect would be. Just because we're standing here, guys, just because it was on the way. Like, here's a line. This post represents that last slide, one of my little zones. So where you guys are, we grazed that in May. The animals are in here 2.5 weeks ago or so, right in here. Which was the second time that this area had been grazed this growing season.
So this is kind of cool while we're here. Let's just look at this, the layout here. We were fortunate when we did the project that there's a borehole under the road already. We get water from the road here, and it all kind of works its way down on this piece of land. And we were able to put our water catchment in. There's a small pond at the far corner. And because we already had the borehole under the road, we were able to bring a pipe from that pond all the way under the road, all the way back to the pond over here.
No kidding. Well,
yeah, so it's kind of cool. There's
you're
a little
taking the runoff from this area and pumping it back. Is that with PV or with is the windmill down that way?
The windmill's down that way. Yeah, it's with there's solar panels over here.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So you put that ditch in there.
Yep.
Basically.
Yeah, the swale on contour. So there's 3 of them, and then there's a little pond in the bottom. It's really cool because it gives us this flexibility. And we really have just started with the system. We haven't maxed it out or even really experimented with it or done a whole lot, but we are pumping water over here. But it gives us several options that we could do. We could fill these swales up if it gets really dry over here on top of the swale, on top of the berms. We planted apple trees on this first one. So we could Potentially we could water those if we needed to. We could irrigate the cropland here if we needed to. We could also, I mean, just get your mind really stimulated. We could pump from the bottom pond with the windmill all the way back over here if we wanted to fill this up, or irrigate over here, or vice versa, like we were just talking about. We can pump from here to the upper pond, or we even pump from here, bypass the upper pond and pump to the lower pond. So it's just like you start thinking about water, it can flow both ways, and you get real creative with the thoughts around it.
You know, this is, again, kind of broad and big picture, but John said something once, or maybe Elvin said it a couple months ago, and it kind of blew my mind. I mean, looking at that pond and all this water in this one, and then there's a whole other one down there, and now I'm watering the greenhouse with it. It's all raindrops, you know? It's all raindrops that would have, you know, left. And it's really interesting, the possibilities and the dynamic, the power of this system is, you know, I mean, I don't even think we've scratched the surface. I wouldn't even go as far to use that cliche.
No.
I mean, there's a lot that can be done out here. It's just new, you know, it's just, that's all. We're still figuring it out. I set up some gates across the street and move everyone over. It's always really fun. I've only had one person turn around and one person yell at me. Everyone else really enjoys it. Let's move them.
We moved them over here, what, beginning of the week?
Yeah, so a couple things, guys, that you're gonna see out here. This field was planted at about 40 pounds to the acre, which is pretty, next time I do it, tomorrow and Monday when I do it again, and when I get back in here, I'm gonna do it much heavier, closer to 80 to 100 pounds per acre. They were in here, again, our resource. We knew we weren't growing vegetables in here. I just wanted to add some diversity, and I wanted to try and get some more fertility going over here, because these are some of the poor soils on our land. So I had the animals in here. They were fairly tight, nothing too crazy, because I didn't have a big, beautiful stand of cover crop. Moving them along quickly, and then this was flail mode, right? So you can see where they are now, and that's about what I'm looking at. This space here we're gonna move them in is going to be trampled heavier because it's smaller, and I'll leave them in for about the same amount of time. The reason I'm doing that is that there's more nutrition and biomass in this paddock coming up. So what we'll do is we'll drill this, and then we'll come and flail mow that residue and transition into cool season. John, you got your soil on you?
I got it. I'm ready.
I would say, I'd be curious to know what you'd say. These swales will fill up with water and flow in about half the amount of rainfall as the one across the street, maybe even more than half, because this little area of our farm is poorer. We have less water infiltration, we have less aggregation, we have less of a healthy soil here. It's not how much rain falls on your farm, it's how much you can keep. And the water and rain that falls here, it tends to leave pretty quickly because it can't percolate into the soil. Across the way there, you know, it's not like it takes tons and tons of rain, but it takes a good bit for that thing to get rocking, which is just one more reason why it's so impressive when it does. But that's our focus on trying to build fertility here, and we want to build it everywhere, but we're kind of focusing and concentrating on it here as well. Let's see that. Obviously it's not as dark, it's not quite as rich, it's heavier, real heavy. You know, I'm seeing some little holes here, some stuff that's kind of leading me to believe there's some macro organisms, earthworms and whatnot, kind of moving through here. I'm seeing char that's worked its way down into this soil. This stuff here, it's just heavier, you know, a lot less aggregation.
It even looks a little aerobic.
Yeah, it does. It
Compacted,
looks kind of
there's
aerobic.
really not a whole lot of pockets in it.
Yeah.
It's just compressed.
So you can kind of understand why it would be harder for the water and the air and the nutrients to move through this as opposed to that. Okay, let's go move some animals.